Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of my 10-minute moan. The topic of this 10-minute moan is John Swinney making an absolute arse of himself at First Minister's questions today. And this one is actually probably the worst example of an SNP Member of Parliament, and in this case First Minister, doing what SNP do, right? And totally blame everybody else for everything that's wrong in Scotland, regardless of how stupid and how insane their claims are. And this one is genuinely probably the worst example of it I've ever seen. And that takes some doing, right? Because, you know, they're great at it. You know that we blame Brexit, we blame Tories, we blame Westminster. It doesn't matter what the question is about their inadequacies. It's always somebody else's fault. Well, this one's the best yet, right? And I actually didn't believe what I was told before I was shown a video of it, right? So the story goes, there's, on Twitter X today, loads of people talking about First Minister's questions. Douglas Ross has got up and made 3 damning observations about the SNP. And the 3 damning observations are, in the 17 years that they've been in power, the life expectancy of Scottish people has reduced. How is that actually possible? I think every time I've seen stats on life expectancy in my whole life, it creeps up slightly. You know, it probably creeps up a few months or week per year. The SNP have managed to bring down the life expectancy of Scottish people in the last 17 years. Right? That was accusation 1. That was frightening. The second one was to reiterate the point that Scotland has the worst drugs deaths per head of capita than anywhere else in Europe. And Glasgow is the worst out of the lot and the worst country out of the lot, right? That is shocking. And the third accusation, pointing out a fact, was that in the last 16 years, the deaths due to alcohol has increased. Now, this is despite bringing in minimum price for alcohol and all this nonsense, right? It just won't actually treat anybody's addiction to alcohol, will not train anybody to think differently about their alcohol consumption. And the way we socially deal with alcohol, not changing the price of anything or some of the drinks just won't stop that. That's proven, but no, they want to stand by this fallacy that, you know, changing and having a minimum price for alcohol will somehow make a magic wand. It's increasing over the last 16 years. So Douglas Ross put these claims to John Swinney today in First Minister's questions, right? And you won't believe this, right? So, as I say, there's a lot of people on Twitter talking about the stats that he put on the table. But there was one guy, I think it's Bob's Country Kitchen, put on this thing saying he actually blamed, and I'll not spoil it in case you've not seen it, right? He actually blamed X for this, right? And I was like, no, he couldn't have done that. Tell me he didn't do that. Because it's completely insane. But he did. Because Bob's Country Kitchen sent me the video, right? And here's the video of John Swinney's retort at First Minister's questions in the Scottish Parliament today, when he was challenged on Scotland's appalling record of life expectancy being lower than it was 17 years ago when the SNP took power, having the worst drugs deaths in the whole of Europe, and deaths from alcohol rising over the last 16 years. Here's what John Swinney said about that.
This is the type of evidence that Parliament needs to chew over and consider when we're dealing with the kind of rhetoric that we hear from Douglas Ross. Professor Jerry McCartney, the Professor of Wellbeing and Economy at Glasgow University, said this, and I quote, "You see lagged effects from decades ago of urban planning, policy decisions and the 1980s economic changes, and how that translated into people's alcohol deaths a decade or 2 decades later. So it is not unprecedented." I simply put that evidence to Parliament because we have to understand the consequences of the devastation wreaked on our country by the policies of Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government.
So there we have it. It's Maggie Thatcher's fault, right? Now, I just can't believe what that man's saying. right? Even his own answer, he's saying some of these things take a decade or two. A decade's 10 years, John. Maggie Thatcher was in power in the 80s. That was 40 years ago, right? And it's like, does anybody buy this shite? Does anybody actually listen to you today and go, I'm going to vote for SNP because what Johnny Swinney said is right. That's terrible, that Maggie Thatcher killing all these Scottish people today. You would need to be insane to take anything that you say is truthful after that outburst today, right? You, my friend, are a total crank. How can you be the Scottish leader and the First Minister in the Scottish Parliament coming up with that nonsense? Now, I understand you need to defend your corner, right? And I understand how politics works, that you need to actually try and defend the indefensible at times. That's just what party leaders do. I understand that, right? But see if you're going to come up with any excuses for your party's absolute abject failure in running this country. At least come up with some that are possibly tangible, right? But can you imagine meeting a mother, right, of somebody who's died in drugs issue tomorrow, where her son's died because we have the highest drugs deaths in Europe, and saying, it's all right, John Swinney says it's Maggie Thatcher's fault. Do you know what I mean? Tell the population of Scotland you're probably going to live less now that the SNP's had 17 years of power. But don't worry about it. It's Maggie Thatcher's fault. Imagine turning up at a funeral and getting in the podium and talking about somebody that's died of alcohol abuse, right? And saying to them, you know, this is Maggie Thatcher's fault. And we've made minimum pricing on alcohol a thing. So you're lucky that there's no Mary you died, because that's obviously a right good effect, this fucking putting minimum charges on alcohol. You are an absolute crank, John Swinney. You deserve to be treated the way Nigel Farage does when he walks down streets. That's all I'm saying. Because you are an absolute crank. How dare you stand up there and defend your party when you're talking about a subject about people dying? Right? The 3 stats presented affect the life expectancy and the chances of being alive. And you want to tell us that it's Maggie Thatcher's fault? Remember this, you're telling Parliament, right? Nobody's wearing it anymore. And I have pity for nationalists that I've put. I know people, right? I've got to befriend people over the last few months who voted for you all their life, put money into your coffers all their life, believed in you. And they are saddened and sickened. They actually hate you more than I hate you, right? Because they were emotionally and financially invested in you. And you have ruined their hopes and their dreams by your and your party's total ineptitude at trying to run a country. You are an embarrassment. You would shame the devils in hell with the things you come out with. And when is the madness going to stop? When is the madness going to stop? You've stood in front of the Scottish people today and accepted the fact that we will live less in your 17 years of power, and you have the audacity to blame someone who was in power over 40 years ago in Westminster. You accept no blame for anything. God help you the next time you walk down the street and you are face to face with a mother who's lost a child through alcohol or drug issues. When they're looking for reasons and justification of why their son died. You go and tell them it's Maggie Thatcher's fault. That's just what they do. You absolute cretinous arsehole, right? You do not deserve to be serving the people of Scotland in any capacity. Never mind their supposed leader. You have no leadership whatsoever. And I hope you don't even last the 2 years of this Scottish Parliament, because you deserve nothing. You need to survive getting your budgets through Parliament to keep the job. And you need to just make sure and cross your fingers that you don't make an ass of that much, that there's a vote of no confidence called on you and on your party. And I really hope that happens soon. And I really hope it happens before Christmas and yous are put in front of the biggest opinion poll in the world, and that's the electorate, to vote for a new government in Holyrood, because your acts are just deplorable. How can you stand there as a First Minister of Scotland and tell the nation of Scotland that's Maggie Thatcher's fault? Jesus, honest to God. Told you, this is probably the best example ever of SNP doing what SNP do. It was their fault. Just think about that for a minute. I hope, right, that anybody who has had the terrible misfortune of losing loved ones due to alcohol and drug deaths, listen to your pish today. Because look at my face, right? I've lost people I know to both addictions. And what did the SNP going to do about it? Well, they'll do fuck all about it. The reason being, they don't even accept it's their fault, right? One of the first rules when you try to make something better is to accept that it's pissed now. And you can't do that because you believe it's Maggie Thatcher's fault. You're an embarrassment, John Swinney. You are an actual embarrassment to the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in Scotland that have been affected by drug and alcohol deaths by coming out with that absolute pish today. These people need banished, by the way, absolutely banished. Criminal the way you talk to people. But it's party first. You actually care about the families of people that have lost. Touch wood, I've not lost any family members, but I've lost a hell of a number of friends. Very, very good people, close friends to me, to addiction problems. And you cannot even give me any hope that it won't continue because you do not accept liability. You accept that it's Maggie Thatcher's fault. But even the words you use to try and excuse it, some professor at Glasgow University telling folk it was decades, 1 or 2 decades to get, out of these problems. Maggie Thatcher was 40 years ago. Your party has been in power in Scotland for almost 2 decades. And here's another mad thing, right? See if it's Maggie Thatcher's fault, right? And that statement was true, that Maggie Thatcher somehow caused drug deaths and alcohol deaths to be so pish poor in Scotland, worse than anybody else's, right? How's it even possible that we would be better than England, Wales and Northern Ireland? Because I might be wrong, right? I might be living in a parallel universe, but I'm quite sure Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister for the whole UK. So if her policies are causing drug deaths today to be the worst in Europe, how come England, Wales and Northern Ireland are better than ours? Surely we would all be the same if your shite was actually even near true. So don't dare, John Swinney, do not dare take a podium in front of the good people of Scotland and blame a Prime Minister who's not been in her seat for over 40 years for the terrible situation in Scotland. We're having the worst drug deaths in Europe and worst alcohol deaths than we had 16 years ago. And the thing that just blows my head is how a government can be that bad that it can make life expectation go down in their term in government. That must be nigh impossible in this day and age. You managed to pull it off, but you don't care. You just blame Margaret Thatcher. If you found this video educational in any way, please give it a thumbs up and it'll help other people see it. And if you've not already subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. But the most important thing of all, unless you're John Swinney, you dirty, treacherous, lying bastard. See everybody else in the world. Have a great day. Cheery bye now.